we're so excited to dive into this. As TJ said, thank you all so much for coming out tonight. My name is Amali, and I'm the events director here at Books Are Magic. And we're so excited to be hosting all of these wonderful authors. So tonight is a part of our month-long Pride event series. And tonight we'll be discussing the intricacies and the processes of writing queer love, romance, and heartbreak in all its many, many forms. Before we dive into this juicy conversation, I just have a few logistics to point out for how tonight's event is going to go. First, we will be doing a hand-raised audience Q&A towards the end of the discussion, so please start thinking of questions to ask and hold on to them. After the talk tonight, these authors will all be around to sign and personalize your books. That's going to be happening in this general area, so we'll let you know where and when to start lining up for that. And finally, if you're joining us virtually on the YouTube live stream, we would love to encourage you to buy the panelists' books online using the link in the live stream description. That's all for me. Now I'm going to turn it over to tonight's wonderful moderator, TJ.
I was going to figure to this up. Hi, I'm TJ Alexander. My pronouns are they, them. I'm a romance author who writes about queer love. All my books have trans and non-binary main characters. Yay! I would love to introduce our panel of lovely authors that we have here tonight. Emma Copley Eisenberg is the author of the novel Housemates, which was a national bestseller and named a Best Book of the Year by the Boston Globe, Kirkus Reviews, People, NBC, Them.us, and Autostraddle. Housemates was also longlisted for the VCU Cable?
No idea.
Okay. First Novelist Award and won the Anathema of Philadelphia's Literary Award for Fiction. Her narrative nonfiction book, The Third Rainbow Girl, was a New York Times notable book, an editor's choice, as well as a finalist for an Edgar Award, a Lambda Literary Award, and an Anthony Award, among other honors. She lives in Philadelphia, where she co-founded Blue Stoop, a community hub for the literary arts. Her next book of fiction, Fast Swim, is forthcoming in April 2026. Dylin Hardcastle, they, them, is an award-winning author, artist, screenwriter, and scholar based on Gadigal Land. Dylan's novel, A Language of Limbs, won the 2023 Kathleen Mitchell Literary Award and was shortlisted for the Dynex Book of the Year and longlisted for the 2025 Stella Prize. Dylan's 2020 novel, Below Deck, was published in 10 territories and translated into 8 languages. It was reviewed to critical acclaim in publications such as Le Monde, France, Zeit, Germany, and The Guardian and the Australian Book Review. Dylin was also the co-creator, co-writer, and co-director of Cloudy River, which was made with completion funding from Clear Screen and principal funding from Screen Australia. It premiered at Mardi Gras Film Festival in 2020 and was later acquired by SBS On Demand. So nice to have you guys. Then Michele Norris is the editor-in-chief of Electric Literature, winner of the 2022 Whiting Literary Magazine Prize. She is the first Black, openly trans woman to helm a major literary publication. A 2021 Out 100 honoree, her writing has been supported by McDowell Tin House and the Kimbillo Center for African American Fiction, and appears in McSweeney's American Short Fiction and Zora. Her debut novel, When the Harvest Comes, published by Random House, came out in April 2025. Jenny Kang is a queer immigrant writer. Oh, I was supposed to look at my phone, I'm so sorry. All my notes are all over the place. I'm still going strong with the facts. Excellent. And the author of Cinnamon Love, winner of the Los Angeles Times Art Seinbaum Prize for First Fiction, the Edmund White Award for Debut Fiction, and the Farrow Brumley Award for LGBTQ Fiction. It was also the finalist for the Andrew Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Fiction. He was the 2022-23 Center for Fiction Emerging Writer Fellow, and his work appears in Agni, Jezebel, Joyland, and elsewhere. Oh my God. And last but not Colleagues, Olivia Wolfgang Smith's debut novel, Glassworks, was longlisted for the Center for Fiction and VCU Cable, we still don't know,
We don't find out.
Yeah.
first novel prizes, and named the best book of the year by NPR, Apple, and Good Housekeeping. Her second novel, Mutual Interest, is out now from Bloomsbury. She is the 2024 NIFA Artist Fellow in Fiction and lives in Brooklyn with her partner. Hello, Olivia. So to kick things off, you've all been very different novels, but I would say one common thread that I noticed connects them is the themes of the erotic. How do you approach writing the erotic in your work? And how do you use it to tell the story that you've chosen to tell? Who wants to start?
I'm holding. Oh, is this on? I'm holding a mic, so I guess I'll start. I think that to give some context, my novel is about gay men in rural China and the women who marry them, and much of it focuses on this theater where gay men get to cruise for love. And it's in a community where queerness doesn't socially or really culturally exist. And so like I always think about the erotic as being classed. Like we often think about sex as this thing that we can have, and it usually doesn't cost money. But for many of my characters who come from this community, who are working class, they live with their families, sex and intimacy becomes this thing that's not accessible to them. I think if you are a very poor working class Chinese person, or rather if you're a wealthier Chinese person who's from this community and you're gay, you could probably rent a motel, you could go to like a bathhouse, but this is not accessible to them. And so I always think about sort of the class dynamics of the erotic in this book.
Love that, appreciate that, and I think yeah, my novel's also like a road trip story, so there's two characters, and I think I was thinking of it as like a site that you get to see these two characters in a way that you don't get to see them in any other context. So like Bernie and Leah are their names. Bernie is a large format film photographer for any like photo nerds in the crowd, and Leah's a journalist, and Bernie is kind of like a tiny twink woman, and Leah is a fat non-binary person, and they're both really different, I think, when it comes to their relationships with their bodies. So I feel like the sex scenes and the erotic moments are there to like allow the characters to be in a space that you don't get to see them in the road trip parts of the book or in the more intellectualized artistic creation parts. So one of them is more sort of confident in the streets, I guess, and shyer in the sheets. So it's an important like context. Like people are always like, why are you putting these sex scenes in? And it's like, no, that's another like space and avenue for you to show what your characters are capable of. I always think it's a missed opportunity when people don't include sex scenes, actually.
I just go better than
I also want to do it. There's no wrong way.
Emma and I have actually talked quite a bit about the idea of being an open door writer versus a closed door writer, and I would imagine that perhaps all of us up here are more open door writers. I certainly am, in that we write the scene, and rather than like doing a fade to black, like we write these erotic scenes out. I know that for me, with When the Harvest Comes, you know, really, in its most basic and simplistic base, I think that it's a novel that sort of starts from a place of grief and is an outgrowth of that. It certainly was for me when I was writing it. And so the eroticism is at the center of the conflict in When the Harvest Comes. And once I sort of came up with that idea, for me, it just became a really great opportunity to figure out all of the different ways in which I could use eroticism and in which I could use sex to illustrate the things that were going on beneath the surface for all of these characters. Because when you really think about it, for me, I think that the value isn't so much just in the erotic, although I think there is value in that. Let's be clear, I think there's great value in reading fiction that's like steamy and hot, but there's also such great storytelling value in the ability to get at what's going on underneath the surface for your characters. You know, intimacy and physicality and sex can kind of give you the choreography that you need to illustrate what the characters are feeling, what they're doing, the things they're saying to each other, the things they're not saying to each other, the things that they're saying to the world, the things that they're hiding from the world. All of that you get to play with just by writing eroticism. So for me, it's great fun.
Yeah, I love that. I love the idea of bringing up the conversation about closed door versus open door. My book, Mutual Interest, is a queer Edith Wharton pastiche. So it's like turn of the century in New York, and it's like riffing stylistically on all of these great like novels of manners that had extremely closed door relation, like are very, very like libidinal and about like psychology of eroticism in their own way. Everyone's making horrible decisions based on like being really horny, but there's not a lot, you know, like so. But like especially like writing in that style and trying to like honor the things that the books I was like paying homage to. I did a lot of thinking about like how much can I get across without opening the door. But then it was really freeing to be like, oh right, it's the 21st century. I can actually then just like keep writing and like keep like and like that ended up feeling. I guess I was very conscious of it. Whenever writing historical fiction, I feel like extra conscious of like how exciting it is to be able to like write and publish these like erotic scenes, and it helps kind of like flesh out characters a little bit more in that setting that I like wouldn't have like don't necessarily get to see those scenes when you're reading actual turn of the century books.
My novel is definitely an open door book. But I actually didn't necessarily think about that or pick up on that until the first review came out in Australia, and it was described as Dylin Hardcastle's steamy fourth novel, and I was like quite taken by that because the entire review was just focusing on the sex. And actually I found that I guess my intention with writing it was to suspend readers in sort of a state of ambiguity and sort of in for that to then speak to, I guess, the ambiguity of my like own desires and impulses and instincts in like as they pertain to queerness, and how so much of my experience of queerness had always been one of like, not quite grasping the language for something, or not quite having like shape to, I guess, the contours of that yearning. And so, I mean, even the way that the book is structured between two stories that almost kiss or almost intersect, and you're not entirely sure if they are two stories, like two versions of one life, or if they are in fact two different people. And so that already was like, I guess the eroticism that I was going for was, in that sort of like, I want and yearning for these two stories to collide, but I actually don't even know if they are two stories that could collide. And so, that kind of ambiguity is what I want to just suspend people in.
Oh, it's okay. That's beautiful. Thank you all. So right now we're living in an era in this country where book bans and censorship are working to remove stories about queer people and people of color from our schools, our public libraries, and our bookstores. Has your writing been affected by this environment? And how would you say that it has? If so, I can pick someone. Dylin, why don't you start?
Not that I know. I mean, I don't really know
Your
how to answer that. Not that I know of. No, I don't think that I have. I don't know quite how to speak that.
I'm realizing this now. First.
I'll say my writing has not been affected by it. Sometimes my, deep anxiety, both personal and global, about like what is going to happen is affected by it, but it has not, knock wood, come from my actual creative process. I think that in terms of writing, it's kind of the opposite. It becomes a therapeutic kind of space to kind of try to put up some, whether that's an act of resistance or just an act of putting up walls of protection. That's my kind of sense of it in terms of my work itself.
Yeah, I think agree with what you said, Olivia, but I think in the current book that I'm working on, it has, because there's that great, not here, but here in spirit, I feel Sarah Thinken Matthews, author of All This Could Be Different, has a wonderful Substack, and she wrote this incredible post that was spite is as a motivator. So I've been very motivated by spite in my current project. I think I'm gonna misquote her, and you should go subscribe to her newsletter, which is called Thought Pudding. But the post is about essentially you want there's satisfaction in like outliving your enemies, like living to see them die and suffer, and and like it's just interesting. Like my next book, which is like a lot about like embodiment and living in a fat body, is going to come out in the age of like Ozempic and book bans. So I'm just like, yeah, I'm living for Spidey right now for sure.
I don't know, like, I don't think I have a particularly, like, intelligent response to this, but, I do think that my characters certainly, they live in an environment where, like, queerness is sort of invisible, and so, like, I think I'm sort of having to respond to this, like, sort of in a backwards sort of way, where, like, they don't, have a cultural reference on how to be gay, they don't have the intimacy, they don't have the behavior, they don't have like sort of the lingo or the way to speak to each other that we as gay people and queer people have in the modern day. And so like I'm sort of curious like when I started writing from that positionality, not of the ban, but of the absence. And so I don't know, I think it's just kind of ingrained in me since when I was a kid.
Yeah, I haven't really given it too much thought in terms of my writing life. To my knowledge, I don't know that it's affected the life of my book, but it's only been out for 2 months, so, you know, who knows? But, you know, I think a lot about Toni Morrison, who said that when she's writing, that's her freest space. No one gets to tell her what to do. And that's the energy that I do bring to the page for many different kinds of reasons. That is the place where I feel most strongly authoritative, and I get to be like, nobody's telling me what to do. And so I kind of, it translates to, first of all, it's the energy that I hope anyone can bring to the page, but it's the energy that I hope that readers are bringing to reading books. And I just sort of think book bans are, certainly there's a lot more energy to them right now. There's not always this much energy to them, but they are old news, and I do not think they work in terms of what they're trying to do. In the same way that, you know, people who needed abortions found ways to do that, readers will find ways to get to the books that they need, and writers are certainly not going to stop writing the stories that they need to write. So it just seems like a stupid thing to do. Pick something effective.
No, agreed. Next question. Thanks for that. One of the things that I personally find the hardest to describe in writing are other arts, visual arts, music especially. I find it very challenging to write about, but a lot of you have incorporated those beautifully in your books. What was your approach to writing those kinds of descriptions? Should we start with Dan?
So for folks who haven't yet read Harvest, the main character in my novel, Davis, is a recent graduate of the Juilliard School and is an up-and-coming professional viola player. And I also played the viola very seriously growing up. And so in the earliest days of writing this book, I knew that Davis was going to be a musician, but it evolved over time. And when I first started the book, I wanted Davis to be a sort of failed musician. Like, he had gone to Juilliard, but he was no longer playing. I had him working at a soap store. He was completely dependent on his partner financially. And I lost interest in that power dynamic. I wanted Davis to have every ability to pay all of his bills on his own without needing to depend on this rich man for his money. And so where he had initially been a cellist, I made him a violinist, and then as the arc of the book and the narrative arc kind of revealed itself to me, I realized that for reasons that are very specific to the instrument of the viola, that I assume not that many people in the literary world know, but I know because I played it so seriously for so many years. I was like, oh, this character has to be a violist. Like there's just no other answer, and so I was like, all right, well, here we go. But once I made that decision, I actually had great fun, because it was sort of like, oh, I've been training my entire life for this. But anyway, I don't know, it was just really important to me that the character be an artist, be a creative, and it was exciting to take something that I love with a lot of veracity, in much the same way that I love literature, and put it into literature.
I can speak next maybe because I have sort of an opposite experience of like that expertise coming through of like, and I love, by the way, like the finding from cello to violin to viola and being like, it's that specific. To the extent that this exists in my book, there's, I think the things I would consider arts that people are doing are perfumery, and then like visual art, like murals, and frescoes on walls. And I have never done either of those things at all. And this is basically like craft talk advice for anyone who is interested in this. I cannot recommend enough having your characters be like really bad at it. And then to the extent that things are wrong, it's like, yeah, they're not good at it. And like I was able to kind of like, as I like researched and like learned and like talked to people and tried my best at things to sort of like have the characters slowly get better throughout their careers and crafts are going. So that's always an option. Like if you're scared of like ekphrastic work, like you can always just have them suck. And as long as another character says like that sucks, like it doesn't matter if you did a good job. That's what, so two ways to philosophy. Spend your whole life getting good at something. Or
Oh my god, I retweet that so hard, yeah, that it's like have a character be bad at it, or like have a different point of view character be looking at the work of art, right? So like, yeah, so large format film photography, absolutely not something that I'm super skilled at either. But the character had to do that because the novel's inspired by a real queer historical figure, Bernice Abbott, the modernist large format photographer. So I was like, okay, also like what would a person who's doing that kind of photography now be like? They would be so annoying. And that's really annoying about the large format photography aspect. So like for folks that don't know, like a large format camera is gigantic. The negative is like it's 8 by 10 or 4 by 5, like huge. And when you look into the frame, the glass, it shows the world upside down and backwards, so that felt really important. But that's basically all I knew. And I was like watching all these YouTube videos, and it was like all these like camera bros it was like the f-stop and the whatever, and I was like, this is not helpful. So yeah, like I had Leah, the writer, narrate a lot of the sections that are specifically when Bernie is working with the camera to show like she doesn't know, and she's learning alongside the reader, right? Being like, this is really slow, this is really fussy, this is how you touch the camera. But I did also just like do a really creepy thing where I like emailed a wonderful large format photographer here in New York who's the photographer in residence of Fresh Hills, the landfill in Staten Island. And I was like, she teaches at the ICP, like incredible photographer, and I was like, you teach photography, like can I just buy like a couple hours of your time, like whatever you charge your students? And so I just like shadowed her as she like walked around and did stuff in Staten Island, because like what I really wanted to do was see like how do you touch the camera, how does looking through something that's upside down and backwards like influence the way you see the world. I wanted the emotional stuff, not the like camera bro stuff.
I studied visual arts for a few years as an undergrad, and actually dropped out of art school to start writing novels. And I remember my mum being so mad that I was leaving university. Was telling me how hard it was going to be to make a living out of writing, and I was like, my backup is painting. As a result, man, I knew how to write somewhat about visual arts, and actually two of the artists that inspired so much of this book were these artists, Claude Kahn and Marcel Moore, and I came across them at a exhibition at the Barbican in London in 2019, and I actually mistook them as gay men, and they were like super androgynous, very mass presenting. And I really recognized like something of myself in their work, and I bought their book afterwards, and saw that they were surrealists and couldn't believe that, because surrealist was my most obsessed art movement. And then was reading their story, found out that they were these lifelong artistic collaborators and lovers, and they're women, and they'd lived together since they were 14 because their parents were getting married so that the girls could live together and be stepsisters and be like affectionate in public because they were passing as sisters. And they lived together their entire life, and they're just the most incredible and exhilarating love story. You should all go and read it and find out about it. But basically like writing about their art was, I guess, yeah, another way of like showing the ways that these stories have, you know, always existed, I guess, in the margins and bringing them into the fore, being able to tell Claude and Marcel's stories sort of vicariously through these characters that discovered them in the 70s. And yeah, I think also like the way that art functions in the book, the visual arts, like two of the characters are making visual arts. And I was interested in how, especially of that time, like in 1970s Darlinghurst, like sort of queer Sydney, so often the art institutions were like really interested in the work that was coming through the underground queer scene, but weren't necessarily interested or supporting the practice behind, you know, the actual love and the fact that so much of this work came from sex and, you know, the eroticism that we were talking about before. And then once that was like actually presented in the institutions, they didn't really want to know where it came from, or the beds in which, or the clubs in which that like work arose. And so it was kind of a comment on that, I guess.
Yeah, and I just love the experience of going to the movies. And so like that is sort of what I think a lot of my book is embodying in these scenes of like describing another art form. I think that it's not so much the movie that's on the screen, but like what the people are doing when they're watching it. And also in the rare moments where I am describing what's on the scene, I do think that there's a really fun tension where visual art, you experience it simultaneously, but in prose you have to write it linearly, and so like that sort of process of curating what the reader gets to see first on the screen that these characters are also watching was fun.
No, that's fascinating. Thank you all. One of the age-old issues that authors deal with is when their book comes out, people in their life, or strangers, may assume that their novels are autobiographical. This might be a bigger problem with the contemporary writers, I would imagine. But do you get a lot of people assuming that your work is autobiographical? And is it? You can tell us. It's just Emma, you want to start?
Sure. Totally. So, Housemates is really a novel about a group house, a chaotic queer group house in West Philadelphia, where these two people meet, Ernie and Leah, in the house. They become roommates. And when I did say, like, yes, I'm publishing this book called Housemates, I did text, like, the 5 people that I lived with in a chaotic group house in West Philadelphia. And I was like, you know, none of you are in it, but the house is 100% nonfiction. Like, all the way that each room connects to another room, the sounds that the radiators made, like, it always haunted me. And I lived in this room that had been connected to another room, and then to like make more money, the landlord had separated it into 2 rooms, but like really shittily, you know, with like a piece of drywall that like it would like when my housemate like was having sex in the next room, it wasn't like next door, it was like as if it was in like, you know, it was like that present and close, you know. So I wanted to conjure that exact feeling, and so to do that I absolutely had to use the non-fictional aspects of a house, because I can't write about a house that I've never been in. I think, to me, that's so, starting with police, and yes, so I was like, you're not in it, but the house is in it, and that's the truth. And my cat, Sesame, is in it, but she does have a different name to protect her privacy.
People know. The cat.
The cat, for sure.
Somebody once asked if it was a memoir, but it's in 3rd person. It's not. But like I don't know, like it's one of, I actually have like the opposite reaction quite often, because like I'm like in my 20s, but my characters are in their 40s and 50s, and so like I've met people before where they're like, you're very young. How do you know about this? I don't know about this. But I think part of it is that like, you know, like a novel is like a very sincere thing, and so like things from your life end up in it, whether you intend for them to be or not. And so like the concept of it being autobiographical is very, very tricky, because in many ways it is, but not in the way that the reader is thinking. There are these 2 characters in the book. There's like a very homophobic but also very heroic woman who I think is my favorite character because she's a bitch. And she's also like my mom. And so like she's there, and like her conflict with another character and her conflict with his sexuality is very, very familiar to me because it's also my mother's conflict with my sexuality. But like it's between her and her husband, and I'm obviously I'm not married to my mother. But those things end up showing up, those emotional conflicts, those tensions end up in the book, those spaces, as you mentioned, that are important to you, or to me at least, they end up in the book in different fragmented ways.
I was gonna say I very much agree with that. It's like the emotions and the dynamics and the specific sort of conflicts or desires that sort of make their way in and infiltrate. Almost as like echoes of experiences that I've had. I actually felt like of all my books, this one mined my own personal experience and trauma the least, which was really nice. It meant that I didn't feel like I had my like guts exposed on the table when the book came out, like by any means. And I think actually setting the book in the 70s and 80s facilitated some sort of distance from that, and like sort of forced me to imagine a lot more. I think because I was writing in a time that I hadn't lived in, and so even like the textures of that place were already in this imagined zone. And yet still there is this real assumption. Like I actually had someone, like a good friend of mine, email me or message me a couple of months ago. I was like, I'm so sorry, I had no idea this was your story. Like after reading the first chapter, and I was like, it's not, what are you talking about? It's 72, I'm 31, what are you talking about?
Math is not our strong point.
Oh, okay, sorry. So I may have set myself up a little bit for this misconception to happen. Just to give a quick overview of When the Harvest Comes, it's a novel about the queer couple, a young, black, effeminate gay man named Davis, who plays the viola, and he is marrying the love of his life, whose name is Everett. He's white, he's a little older, like late 30s, from a family that will resemble the Kennedys. And the novel opens on their wedding weekend, and you go through a section with a lot of wonderful wedding content, and then we learn that Davis, who's estranged from his father, who's a Baptist minister, we learn that his father's been in a terrible car accident. And so, for me, I mentioned earlier that this novel grew out of a place of grief, and that is that I began it about 7 or 8 months after my father died, when I was in graduate school, and it really began actually as an exercise. My father had died when I was a month into my MFA program. I left school, I came back to school. I wrote a lot, but all of it was bad. Even though everyone told me it was good, I knew it was bad. And I didn't revise anything, I didn't rewrite anything, and I was like, none of this is worthy of publication. How am I ever going to become a writer? I can't work on anything long enough to get it to be good enough to be worthy of a reader's time and attention. And so I really left the first year of my program in a pretty dark place and feeling like I should probably just quit Sarah Lawrence and go to law school. And then I came up with an idea, and I gave myself an exercise, and the idea was to take something that was very close to my lived experience, and use that as fiction so that I wouldn't worry about convincing a reader of anything's accuracy, and I could just put all of my energy into the emotional truth that I was really trying to write towards. And out came this project that eventually became this novel. And so, I stole occupations, I stole locations, I stole street names and locations and all kinds of things. And so it has been a really interesting thing. And everyone in my life, I'm not one of those people who never told anyone they were a writer and then all of a sudden published a book. I have a big mouth, and so everyone always knows what I'm up to. And so all the people in my life who've been waiting for years and years to finish this novel, because it took 15 years to write and publish, people have read it. And so it's very interesting. So I was just home for the last few weeks because my mother passed away, and I was walking my dog yesterday before getting in the car to drive back to New York, and a neighbor, a lovely, lovely man who's known my family for 40 years, was like, well, I've just finished your book, and beautiful and all these things, and you know, it was just so interesting to sort of like have known your family and to have ideas and questions about what in the book is real and what's not, and have a little bit of insight. And I just thought, oh man, that was a thing. And we left it at that. But the point is, it is a wild experience. But this novel, I have said this, and it is true that it looks much more autobiographical than it is. I think in very obvious ways, but you know, the trick about writing fiction is that everyone wants to catch you in the truth. And when you're writing nonfiction, everyone wants to catch you in the lie.
That's intense. As someone who never writes nonfiction, I'm like shaken by that. Yeah, I think it sounds like everybody is getting at the idea. This is Elizabeth McCracken's like phrase that I'm thinking of things being emotionally autobiographical, where you can kind of be like, it's not autobiographical, but I can tell you, I can point to the 30 things in this book that are direct thoughts and beliefs that I have, but I won't tell you which 30. Kind of thing. I feel like you would think that this doesn't come up for me, like, but it's shocking. It does. I don't know. My most recent book is like about a lavender marriage in like 1904 that like brings in a third partner, both romantically, domestically, and also to run a like soap and scented candle company. And that does not describe my life in any way. But people do ask like about connections to it. It's like do you is this coming from your life in some way? And it's like no. But then like getting the question so much makes me think about it. And I do think like I get asked a lot which of the three main characters is me. I don't know if that is something that other people can relate to. I feel like thinking about that question has made me realize that the three main characters are like my Inside Out team. Like a couple of the scenes where they're like trying to solve a problem together, I'm like, this is what it looks like when I think. Like if it were to be like dramatized, this is some kind of like sun, moon, rising thing. So like getting that question has made me think about like all of the different ways that the answer to is this autobiographical can be yes, but it is usually when it's asked in a way that it's like no, that's not asking.
That's so interesting. My last book was a Regency romance, and I've definitely gotten people saying like, "Well, which one of these are you?"
Okay,
I'm like, I wasn't there.
I'm glad it's not just me.
wasn't there. These are other guys. Great. So I wanted to talk about how family shows up in a lot of these stories over and over again. And there is as much, or in some cases even more, love and tragedy found in those familial relationships as there are in the romantic ones. How do you think about the concept of family and the way it's tied with queerness, either blood family or chosen creative family? What do you want to start?
Sure. My immediate thought is I love writing about chosen family. I find it really interesting. It's like a great thing about writing, telling queer stories. I find it like most interesting in the sense of exploring like conflict and tension and negative things, which I think is like something we so often talk about it as like a very positive alternative to a traumatic family of origin, which is great and is lovely. But I think that the most interesting thing in fiction when I think about queer family and chosen family and found family is like being that vulnerable with people, especially by choice, especially people that you feel like you've let in on purpose. That there's a lot of potential for a lot of conflict, which is maybe not something you like in real life, but is great in fiction. So that's what comes to mind with this question first.
For me, I very much think of, I guess, the families within queerness as, like I said, predicated on action, and have come to think of community as a verb and as like a doing, and as, like these ways of forming like subaltern communities and sort of like carving out space, for futures in which all of us live. Very much feels like, queerness as like a politic and as an action, and therefore I think of like community not necessarily as like this like thing that we buy into, but that we like become a part of through ongoing action, and that's like what makes those spaces, and that essentially is what makes that family unit for me.
Yeah, no, that's so beautifully put, both of you. And yeah, I think I really wanted to write a novel about a group house because I don't think there are enough of them. Like, also, like, if you have one that I haven't read, like, please come and talk to me after. But like, yeah, I really wanted to write something that is true to the intimacy of a housemate relationship. So I read, like The Girls of Slender Means. I read Mary McCarthy. Sophie's Choice is secretly a boarding house / housemate novel, in my opinion. Come for me afterwards. And I think I'm just really interested in this idea of like uncategorizable intimacy, like intimacy that is fostered in kind of group living situations. Like if you've ever lived in a dorm, if you've ever had a house guest that's overstayed their welcome, like if you've ever you lived in an apartment building and heard people's sounds, right? Like all of that stuff is so interesting to me, and we don't have any like neat categories to put those people in, right? Like when you're living with people who are not your blood family, not your lover, but people that you're hearing them talk to their mom and you're seeing like their like poop stains on the toilet, but like you don't know where they're from, or like you don't know like what is important to them, but like you have all these like physical intimacy markers, right? I find that stuff like fascinating. And so for this novel too, I was really interested in like, and I've written about this a little bit, but I've kind of noticed that there's like a trend in a lot of contemporary queer literature that like these kinds of community environments like can become very prescriptive, or tend to become almost like a morality or a religion, like sort of like being the right kind of queer or the right kind of queer community member can become a plot point in a lot of contemporary fiction. And it's definitely a plot point for my characters and housemates, and they're trying to really figure out like, how do I live ethically? It's very much like the Sheila Heti question of like, how should a person be, is what motivates Brandon and Leah out the door to go on this road trip, because they need to kind of escape actually their queer family to find out some of the answers to that, I think. And I was interested too in kind of like breaking down this divide between like urban queer people, smart, rural, like people who live in the country, like stupid, and they go out onto the road into Pennsylvania and like are sort of like testing their ideas of what a family is and what a good queer person is against everyone they meet, including like an Amish boy who's living in an intentional community, including like queer folks who are monitoring their land for fracking, like these kinds of moments that like aren't necessarily what we think of as like strong sort of familial bonds, but like all of those places have created strong family communities too that the characters are learning from, and then they take back to their like sanctimonious little queer house, right? And make it different, and it's different when they get back. Yeah.
At the core of my book there's a lavender marriage, and I always think about like I don't know, like I think that like there's this sort of perception that is not completely unfounded that these marriages are false, that the relationship, because they're predicated on a lie, that the emotions in them, that the love in them is false. But the primary and the core lavender marriage in my book is based on one that I know of in real life, where there is one of my mother's friends who is married to a woman and the father of 3 kids. Like one time I saw him have like an intimate encounter with a man at a bus stop out in the open in rural China. And it was not like he slapped this man's butt or anything, but there was such like an intense intimacy and anxiety and fear in his eyes when he did it, that immediately my mind leapt to all the rumors about this man throughout his life. And so like the immediate reaction when I saw that when I was in my teens was, who is this man and what does it mean to live like this in this place where you are so afraid to exist? But then really, as I started to write the book much later, my interest was really, who is that woman who married him? Who is this woman who supported him? Who, I mean, she must know that he is doing these things, but yet still maintains a form of, I don't even know what you would call it, platonic intimacy with him. But I wanted to explore that relationship, and I wanted to explore how that love can be real and truthful, and also subversive in many ways.
I really wanted to write about family in some very sort of traditional ways. So I'm a big fan of the novel Ghana Must Go by the writer Tay Selassie, and some years ago I saw her speak on a panel at the Brooklyn Book Festival, and she talked about how when she published her novel Ghana Must Go, people, all they wanted to talk about were like the geopolitics of Ghana and of Africa. And she had not written a book about that. She said on the panel, like, I just wanted to write a book about a family. I'm African, so I wrote a book about an African family. If anyone has a family, they know that, like, that's enough. And I really related to that. I wanted to write a novel where you have some relatively traditional families that in some ways we've seen before, families that perhaps in some ways we haven't seen before, or pockets of those families maybe we haven't seen before. I wanted to put queerness at the center of it, and I wanted to write a novel about the tension of queerness in those sort of traditional familial sensibilities. And, you know, but I wanted to write a sweeping family novel. And so, you know, I did.
I think we have time for one more question, and then we were going to do the Q&A. One short question, so short answers only, please. Who do you trust the most when it comes to critiquing your work as you're working on it, and why? Perfect, let's go.
So I'm in a very powerful 3-person group chat, and Denne is in it also. And we do exchange work only under the most specific circumstances, which is fully consensually, if we all are ready at the same time, and we're very specific about the kind of feedback we want. It's not like thoughts, ? It's like, no, I only want to know like these 4 things. Thank you very much. And I do show my partner late in the game, and I have specific questions for them as well. And that's pretty much it. Everyone else, and like my editor obviously, but everyone else in like galleys only. Yeah.
Just my agent.
Yes, this 3-person group chat, which includes Emma. I have one friend from graduate school that I also send everything to, and then it says my agent and my editor. And so what that means, especially given how long it takes me, is that mostly I only trust me.
Sorry, I'm passing it all the way down for some reason. The only thing I'll say is that there's a phase of my writing group friends and I have a phase of our process where we will share a manuscript with each other and we'll just say, I just need to know whether this is a book or a hat made of newspaper. And there's only one right answer to that question. It's like, it's a book. And that's like, it's like, that actually is like a load-bearing killer of my mental health and my process. And the people I trust to do that specific thing that needs to happen.
I actually, with the language of limbs, I actually ended up reading out quite a lot of it at like friends' poetry nights or like spoken word nights, which was really good because all my friends like you can read their faces, none of them have poker faces. So I knew what was working, what wasn't, and yeah, that was kind of about my litmus test for what was working.
Beautiful. My wife does not get to see it until we get finished copies in the house. So Q&A now. All right, so if you have a question, please raise your hand, and I will come to you. I'm not really.
We'll repeat that.
I'll repeat the question into the microphone for you. Who wants to be brave? I'll just start calling on people. No, I'm kidding. Yes, hi.
I'm just a fan.
Uh-huh.
So I want to know if your college education was worthwhile and if you're willing to tell me your age.
We want ages,
Age range.
age ranges, and we want to know if college was worthwhile.
Or did somebody do an MFA that was
Oh,
worthwhile?
or did anyone have an MFA program that was worthwhile? Valuable information. Great, love it. Valuable. Was it valuable?
Those people who I text about whether a book is a hat made of newspaper, I met them at my MFA, so worth it for sure. And I'm turning 36 on Thursday. And I speak for you, everyone's in the same boat. Everyone's turning 36 on Thursday.
Well, I loved my college experience, so I feel like that makes it worth it alone, but that 3-person, very powerful group chat was created because all 3 of us attended Haverford College at the same time. and then became novelists. And I loved my MFA as well. Like, I know I had a hard time that first year, but the second year was amazing, and I went to school with some incredible authors and writers and thinkers and people. So, you know, I love it. It threw me into debt, but you know, it's hard to be an American and not have debt. So, and I'm 39.
I don't have an MFA. I have a degree in visual arts, which proved to be somewhat helpful in the end. And I'm 31. And yeah, my visual arts was worth it. It was fun.
I did do an MFA. I don't know that I would recommend it, except for that it gave me time. So that is important. It was like the first time I called myself like a professional writer, so that mattered. But I would say go somewhere where, you know, not everyone is old and white and straight. And I felt I was in Virginia, and I've never felt more like plump and Jewish and weird in my life, which is like not that weird. I'm just a white girl. So I would say hopefully things have changed, but yeah, I think MFAs are a very loaded and bizarre system of teaching art. That's actually part of what Housemates is about, is like artistic mentorship, and how those people are both really important and can be really toxic.
I don't think I would have been able to write this book without having the time of the MFA, but I didn't like my experience there. Not because the program is bad. I was in Alabama and I don't know how to drive. I grew up in the city, and I'm 28.
I'm in my 40s. Question mark. I don't have an MFA. I did get a master's that I do not use. Waste of money, wouldn't recommend that. Who else? Who's next?
Okay, I'll go. I'm curious, I know we were talking about like writing the erotic. Do you guys care if your readers find your sex scenes hot?
Do you care if your readers find your sex scenes hot?
Like, do they tell us? Like, how would I know?
Some of us on the internet hear it every day.
I mean, a lot of my sex scenes, like, I mean, there's not a lot of them, but like, once again, like, to bring up sort of the class aspect of the book, like, a lot of the intimate moments of the book happen in like really, really odd spaces where I would not want to have sex. Like they're happening in like public restrooms, in the bushes at the park, like in the movie theater. So like maybe some will find that sexy, but like I really am into describing the filthiness of it. So I don't think so.
Yeah, I think my answer is no, also. I don't care because, like we were saying before, like the purpose, like I think that begs the question of like what is the purpose of a sex scene, right? And I think there's like a lot of like delightful, delicious books in which the purpose of a sex scene is to turn you on, and like that's a category in a bookstore, right? And like I would love to be shelved in that category sometimes if people do find it sexy, but that's not like the purpose of the sex scene for me. I think the purpose for me is more character development and like showing the characters' contradictions and the things that they're like bringing to a two-hander. You know, this novel is a two-hander of two people who are exploring a connection. So no, I don't think so. And I also am very interested in just like the ways that different kind of bodies are rendered with precision. So like it was really important for me to put in this book, like Leah is fat, but like not all fat roles feel the same, right? Like some people's bodies are like squishier, some people's bodies are harder, right? Fat is like like flesh and fleshiness, and body parts all feel really different. So to me, I was more trying to render like a true experience of having an erotic encounter rather than like to turn you on. Although like I sometimes am turned on by myself in my writing, and I think that's fine and like healthy and a fun part of being a writer. Yeah.
Yeah, I really agree with that. Just to be fully transparent, I feel like it's not a spoiler. The very first scene of When the Harvest Comes is a sex scene, and I do hope that you find it hot because I want to communicate something about this couple that's at the center of this novel, and communicate something about some of the conflict that's going to arise later in the book, which sex is a big part of. But yeah, it's so it really depends on what I'm trying to communicate largely to the reader. But yeah, it was fun. It was fun. The very first line of dialogue in my novel is "Stay inside me." I was very nervous about sending that out to publishers. But it's still there, and I'm happy about that.
That's a great opening line. I don't know if I mind whether people would find it hot or not. I think similarly it's serving a purpose that's not necessarily about turning people on. But I guess like taking characters to the edges of where how they relate to each other in ways that are really exposing and revealing when they're naked and having sex, and therefore it was more about like how those I guess like vulnerabilities and edges of the characters are exhibited through the sex rather than. I also just think I wouldn't. I don't know. I was thinking about the fact that occasionally when I'm feeling really sadistic, I'll and can't sleep at like 4 o'clock in the morning, I'll read 1-star reviews of the book, and I haven't come across any like terrible things about how the sex is unsexy. But I wouldn't be surprised if that happened.
Thank you. I definitely don't. It resonates the idea that like where the like emotional intimacy is in the book is not necessarily where the physical intimacy is in the book. Like just in terms of like writing hopefully compelling fiction and like where that like you want things to match up in like incongruous ways. So that's not something that super has been on my mind, especially writing in this kind of like more like buttoned up kind of repressed setting where the characters are kind of like, I don't know, I don't want to be jerk, but learning. I will say though, even though it never occurred to me to like care about that or think about that, one time somebody gave me the feedback that they thought that one of the sex scenes in the book was hot, and I was like very unexpectedly touched. I was like really, really proud of myself. So it's like one of those things maybe that you don't care until you find out you do.
That's lovely. As a romance author, it's my job. I think we have time for one more question. Who's it gonna be? Hi, yes.
First of all, thank you guys. But are there any novels that like you felt taught you about queer love, or that you would recommend, or maybe helped you write about the queer love in your books?
Are there any novels that taught you about queer love, or that you felt influenced you in your work?
The one and only answer that I could ever give is The Heart is a Lonely Hunter by Carson McCullers. Beautiful, strange, southern gothic novel. Carson McCullers not read enough, I don't think. I read her in high school, but I feel like she's gone out of fashion. There's a lot of different connected storylines in that book. It's very modern. There's a young queer character. I think like as Carson McCullers' queerness has like been recognized via like Jen Chaplin's book, my autobiography of Carson McCullers, that the character in The Heart is a Lonely Hunter is being given like a sort of more queer lens retroactively, but I think if you read it, you can really feel it. There's like a heartbreaking scene that I shan't spoil, but that it's like that character figuring out like being a teen person with like no sense of like who you are and what you want with your body, like physically bumping up against someone else's, and there's nothing like inherently traumatic. It's not a sexual assault, but it's a really difficult and sad and beautiful scene of like someone figuring out like that has consequences, like to not know what you want sexually and to be with someone else has consequences. And there's also a beautiful character in that book that I would also read as like somewhat trans or genderqueer, who's a like AMAB man who runs a cafe, and he's like yearns to have a child. He wants to birth a child basically. This being written in like middle 20th century in Georgia. It's like incredible. And the ways that he describes like wanting to give birth and wanting to be in contact with someone else sexually, like I think like Dylin was saying, like there's no language for that, but it's in there, and I wanted to do something like that. Yeah.
Give a quick answer that for like a one book that's like my book is like reaching towards is probably Ian Forster's Norris, which I think probably a lot of people in this room know, but if you don't, it's like really great. And if like I think that a lot of like young baby queer fans of like novels of manners and like especially love stories are sort of like projecting ourselves onto one or the other of like the couple in the story. And Norris is just a great, like, it, like, my brain exploded the first time I read it. And I was just like, this is actually a novel, like, written in 1912 and 1913 about a gay couple or a gay situation, I will say. And it's just a really, there's like a lot that's really like shaggy and messy, and it's forced her working out a lot of stuff and didn't get an editor, and was published posthumously after homosexuality was decriminalized in England in the 70s. So it's like a book that has like a lot, like many like hearts and hands, like touched it and cared about it before it ever saw the light. And I feel like very lucky when I think about like being alive at a time when we get to read it, because there was so long that wasn't the case. So that's my one rep.
I would say both the first two novels by James Baldwin were hugely influential for me. Go to It on the Mountain and Giovanni's Room, just massively influential to the love story aspect. And then also, I don't remember the name of this story, but it's in the collection of stories called Counter Narratives by the writer John Keane, and it's actually an imagined romance between Langston Hughes and, oh my gosh, I can't remember the other character's name either, but it's just absolutely stunning, both on a craft level and in terms of the way it uses physical intimacy to communicate between these two characters. So that was hugely influential for me. It's in the book Counter Narratives.
There's a book in Australia called Host City. I actually don't know. I can't imagine it would be available here. Sorry, but it had a print run of like 600 copies, and I was spoken on a panel with David in Australia and ended up reading this book. It's sort of a memoir of him arriving in Sydney in the 80s during the height of the AIDS crisis, and then it turns into spec fiction. But there's this like beautiful scene where essentially at the time in the 80s, people on the radio kept talking about building a wall around Darlinghurst and sort of quarantining the community, and like, you know, sort of cutting them off. And in this book that happens, and so everyone's at Sleazeball, this huge party, and it gets shut down, and they're forced up the street and into this like walled then community called Grid. And so the second half of the book then turns into sort of dystopian novel that's like half an inch away from reality. And there's this scene where, you know, everyone's been beaten up, and it's all this violence has ensued, and three of the characters who are all best friends get into the shower and suck each other off, and it's just like in this like dark shadows, and it's really steamy, and it like literally steam, and it's like kind of reminiscent of a sauna, but it's like this queer intimacy and love being the love that these characters have for each other as the antidote to this violence. And, you know, similarly in The Language of Limbs, there's a scene kind of that I took, or that played with that idea when Mardi Gras occurs, which was like the first big pride, I guess, protest that descended into like a huge riot of police brutality, and 53 people got beaten up and arrested, and two of the characters have their first kiss under a car, like as chaos is devolving around them. And so kind of like, yeah, books, I guess, Host City does that so beautifully, of meshing the violence and the queer love as being the antidote to that.
Yeah, I think for me it's a lot of nonfiction, and like scholarly work about like gay people in places where you don't traditionally think they would exist, like the countryside of China. And I can't remember the name of the book, but I remember the author, the scholar, is named Tiantian Zheng, and it's about, you know, gay men in China and the urban centers of China. But like a lot of them are people who come from the countryside, and they go to the urban centers so that they can be gay, or some version of it that we might identify. You know, in a sort of American equivalent, Samuel R. Delaney's Times Square Red, Times Square Blue. You know, the porn theaters in Times Square, and the communities that were there. Those are always influential to me.
I think that's it for the Q&A. Thank you all so much. And let's give it up for